I'm going to tell you why this setting was the best there ever was.
On the 10th day of Sinir, in the year 554 Myceline Reckoning, a battle took place on these fields, one that would shape the history of Cyrelia for the next century. Here, in the small village of Manolis, outside the great city of Dalton in western Anyer, the forces of a simple country priest, Adam Banier, marched on the most powerful regent in the fractured realm, Darien Avon, the Dragon Prince of Avenil. Banier's rise was as sudden as it was mysterious. He claimed to be descended from the ancient bloodline of Rold, the once mighty rulers of the Anurian Empire, a family with the blood of the gods flowing through their veins. But it had been over 500 years since their rule came to an end, and with it, the unified empire that once stretched from coast to coast.
In 1995, TSR came up with, in my opinion, the greatest setting D&D has ever seen. Designed by Rich Baker and Colin McComb, Birthright burst onto the scene and was an instant success. Well, not so much. You see, Birthright was the right thing at the wrong time. A year before the first Game of Thrones novel, and 15 years before the HBO series based on it, gamers didn't seem to know what to do with Birthright at the time. What was this game where players had the chance to be kings or queens and rulers of their own domain? I mean, how could you go dungeon crawling when you had to set tax policy? What players and DMs back then maybe didn't realize was that the royal power could be the destination, not the starting point. Of course, it was possible to start out as a ruler, but in my opinion, that wasn't the way to go. And speaking of my opinion, why does it count? Well, back in 1995, I went to my friendly local game shop the week that Birthright was released. Within a month or so, we started a campaign that included my wife and one of my best friends, as well as a couple of other friends at the time. Almost 27 years later, we are still playing that same campaign. The characters are different, of course. 3 generations have come and gone. The world has aged 70 years. Sure, we take breaks at times for other games, but for almost 3 decades, and now over 4 different rule editions, Birthright has lived at our table. One continuous story. My wife still plays, only taking a little break when the kids were pretty young. My good friend from the original group is still here, usually playing one of the Morgans, descendants of his first character. The rest of the original group faded, but around the year 2000, with the launch of 3rd edition of D&D, a new group of friends joined us, and it has survived into our regular Friday night group to this day. In fact, I just did a short video where I was terrorizing them with a giant centipede. I can safely say, I think, that I have the longest running continuous Birthright D&D campaign in the world, simply due to the fact that it would be practically impossible for anyone to have done one longer. So why do I and my group and so many others think this game is so great? Well, I'm going to tell you, and in no particular order, these are the 7 reasons I think Birthright is the best ever. Reason 1, the look. The artwork in this game is beautiful, and it fits the setting like a glove. A darker style of artwork would not evoke the hope that's inherent in the land, that a new ruler will come to the throne and be a wise leader for his or her people. About as dark as the artwork got was the magnificent cover art for the setting, and the DM screen. It features a clash between the inhuman northern raiders and one of the kingdoms of Anur. It is inspiring and perhaps the best piece of unifying art I've ever seen in a role-playing game. This cover was broken down, and separate parts of it were featured on the 3 main rulebooks in the original box set. When I close my eyes and think Birthright, almost always this scene is one of the first things that pops into my head. Reason 2. The Iron Throne of Anur. Many fans of Birthright have always wondered if George R.R. Martin took inspiration from this game. Yes, the seat of the Anurian Empire was called the Iron Throne, just as it is in Westeros. George was an avid role player, so this is a little more possible than one might think. Making the claim even stronger and maybe a little more curious is the name of one of the main contributors to the Birthright line, Ed Stark. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
554 was a year of constant warfare in western and central Anur. Small battles erupted everywhere, as Darien quickly decided to squash the claim of this unknown priest to the Iron Throne, the symbolic seat of the broken Anurian Empire. This was a claim that Avon thought was his by right. Initially, his forces routed those of Adam Banier, but Adam found a fast friend in William Morgan II of Osorde. Morgan gave legitimacy to his claim, something Avon was determined to punish him over. Though Adam had to flee the field several times in the face of superior numbers, his forces fought hard. They fought hard for the man they knew to be not just their king, but their emperor. Adam desperately needed a larger army. He set about courting another contender to the Iron Throne, one who was distant kin. Eric Borroween was a fierce rival of Darien Avon, but he had his own claim on the Iron Throne by blood. What he did not have was something that Banier did, the ancient and reforged Sword of Roll.
Reason 3. The maps. I've seen maps in other D&D settings, and to me, they can be over-designed or slightly uninspiring. Something between the kind you'd find in a dry atlas or a war game, or a book of pretentious art. But the Birthright maps are just about perfect. Elegant, simple, and at once readable. They look like something your characters in the game would be able to unfurl themselves. I told you before that my mind quickly goes to the cover art of this game when I think of it, but pretty quickly after, it goes to the 2 main maps that are included with the box set. I've reinforced mine with duct tape over time to make sure they last, and if I were to lose them, they would be one of the first things I would immediately replace. They are downright beautiful. Reason 4. Low magic. And magicians. In this setting, if you're a wizard, you have the chance to grow to be very powerful. Using your powers not just for typical adventuring purposes, but for the realm itself. Tap into a ley line, and you can cast some pretty fearsome magic, the kind that can help decimate an opposing army. That's provided your regent has provided you the costly material needed to perform such a powerful ritual. Will that spell beggar the kingdom and cause you to win the foreign battle but lose the domestic war, as your realm's people are crushed under an unbearable tax burden? These are the kind of things that you need to weigh in Birthright. It's therefore expected that true wizards are rare. But they do allow a new class, magicians. They, and Also, bards are allowed to cast illusionary and divination magic, essentially becoming hedge wizards. If you're a fan of wizards running sky taxis in your fantasy game, this is definitely not the game world for you.
While engaged in the battles of 554 with Darien-Avon, Adam Banier risked his remaining forces to head north and relieve a surrounded Eric Borroween, who was cut off by forces of Anier's eternal enemy, Prince Raysain, the Gorgon. Banier was able to break through and save Borroween at the cost of many of his men. At that moment, Borroween decided to support Banier's claim and pledged his remaining forces to defeating Darien-Avon. Within 2 months, new levies were raised, and 2 formidable armies marched on Avenil for one decisive blow. Avon put part of his army in his ancestral keep and led the bulk of his forces in the field. At first, his army had the upper hand as Borroween was delayed by screening forces. But Banier held on, and, in a reversal of what had just happened months earlier, it was he that was rescued from certain disaster by Borroween. The battle raged for an entire day.
Reason 5. War cards. The setting comes with a system to resolve mass combat with a map and tons of these beautiful unit cards. The battle system accounts for realm magic spells and even the adventurers being included within a unit. What I used to do was take a turn using the war card system and then zoom in on the player action. Do a few rounds of combat at that level. But eventually, what was happening on the strategic level would filter down to the players on a tactical level. Now, was the system perfect? Probably not. You had to use random resolution cards instead of dice to resolve who won when 2 units tangled. I would have preferred dice myself, but that's a minor complaint. The war card system was easy enough for everybody, even non-war gamers, to grasp, and the cards really did give you a personal attachment to your army. Before I give you reason 6, I was wondering if you could do me a favor. Go ahead and throw a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this kind of content. It's always appreciated. Thank you. Without further ado, reason 6, Bloodlines. If you play a character in Birthright, chances are they have the blood of the old gods in them, shed at the Battle of Mount Daymar over 1,500 years earlier. The old gods got together to take care of the worst of them, Azrai, once and for all, but in the process, they all killed themselves and created a whole new pantheon of gods, demigods, and blooded people who are connected with the land, and that would be your characters. To rule, characters must have this connection. It's kind of like King Arthur, one land, one king. As he or she goes, so goes the land. Characters have bloodline strength, and the stronger the line, the stronger their connection. They can pass their bloodline on to an heir in a religious investiture ceremony, or they can have it ripped out of them by having their hearts pierced by someone else who is blooded. It's called blood theft, and it has led to years of instability in Anier. That's fertile ground for a player character to try their hand at rule and maybe stop the chaos once and for all.
Late in the day, Banier called for one decisive push into the center of Avon's line. With the fanatical strength of his soldiers' will, the gamble worked. And Avon's army faltered, fell back, crumbled, and eventually routed. A few hours later, Avon died in his daughter's arms. Aubrey Avon would spend the next 7 years plotting revenge on her father's behalf. But the day was won. Adam Banier I was crowned, and became the first Enorian to sit the Iron Throne for 500 years. The land would have more than just a new king. It would have an emperor who would reform the broken kingdoms into a powerful empire that would once again stretch from coast to coast across the continent of Cyrilia.
Reason 7. The NPCs and the writing. You've heard now a little about Darian Avon and Eric Boroween, but there are so many other great hooks and NPCs in this setting. Rich Baker and Colin McComb knocked it out of the park in the box set, and the supplements surprisingly kept the standards high, right up to the very end. My old friend read the write-up on Osorde, one of the kingdoms in the box set, and he said, "Hey, I read here this William Morgan II was cheated out of his realm and is on the run. Maybe I could play him." And it worked marvelously, as he's had brothers and children of his own that became player characters later on. And I'd reckon there's similar stories from people who've adventured in Birthright throughout the years. The NPCs are living and breathing. Their weaknesses and strengths laid bare, both ruler and non-ruler alike. DM's heads should be utterly full of side stories and adventure ideas after reading the primer on the Enerian kingdoms. I'm going to give you a bonus reason number 8, and that is you can be a king or a queen, or if you're following the framing story, an emperor who unites the entire realm. If you haven't already guessed, that framing story was the focus of my earliest campaign. One of my players was Adam Banye, who had no idea of his lineage when he started his priest character. But yes, you make decisions that affect kingdoms. Sure, you can explore things yourself, even when you are the leader. Something I always equated to Captain Kirk going on the landing parties. Nobody really cared. I mean, who's going to tell him no? The added layer of responsibility brought a surprising amount of thought to players who were accustomed to ordinarily playing nothing more than murder hobos. But not being a ruler in this setting is just fine too. In fact, after that initial campaign, I found less and less reasons to use the Regency rules to running a domain, though I have still intermittently used the war card system, which is surprisingly very useful. Still, there's so much world here for normal characters to explore. Being a ruler is not a prerequisite, and perhaps that's something they should have stressed a little bit more at the time. So in short, I love this setting. We occasionally do take breaks to play other games, but there's always a feeling of collective anticipation when we go back to Anyer and Birthright. Now, of course, for the shared history and stories, but also in no small part because the setting was set up to near perfection for our group. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you couldn't tell, Birthright is a passion for me, and I'm happy to share it with all of you. That's all for now. Goodbye, and until we meet again, take care.